This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
All right. Are we good? All right. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'm very grateful to Ken Ford and the rest of the Institute for the gracious invitation to speak, to the faculty who've impressed me very much and made me feel so welcome, and particularly to Patty Mohan, who's really greased the skids for me and made it all very welcoming and easy. Nobody actually placed any real restrictions on what I could talk about tonight, which was dangerous, and I plan to be pretty wide-ranging in my presentation today, and I'll be delighted to take your questions at the end. I want to tell you today about what I do and why I do it, and why I think it's important. And in the process, I want to tell you why I think what happens here at the Institute is important, why it is, in fact, of cosmic significance. I'm not going to go through my bio again because Ken just told you. I did, in fact, practice medicine at Detroit Receiving Hospital for probably longer than anybody ever should. I've never been an exercise physiologist or a biomedical engineer or anything like that. So it was a little bit surprising to be asked to come to speak here. I'm really just an old retired inner city meatball ER doctor and rat whacker turned barbell coach. So once upon a time, I was an academic physician scientist, and we'd often have community and rural practitioners come to grand rounds to talk to us about how they did it out in the hinterland. And so now the tables are turned. I'm coming to the academic center from the hinterland. What's going on here is way beyond my pay grade now. So I'm going to tell you what I do, and I'm not going to try to lecture you too much about the science, because the science that's happening here is cutting edge. I'm going to tell you about my practice, and I'm going to offer you what I think you'll find a very different perspective. My research back in the day focused on brain injury and resuscitation, which I like to describe as the problem of what happens when the most complex object in the known universe gets sick, and what, if anything, can be done about it. This is a figure from one of the papers I published in the neuroscience literature. This work led me to a lot of work and thinking about stress signaling, growth factors, and survival and death phenotypes and aging. Yeah. Transient global brain ischemia is the most complex pathophysiology of any disease process known. This is another figure I published during this period with my colleagues Blaine White, Don DeGracia, and Brian O'Neill in the Journal of Neurological Sciences, which I'm quite proud to say has been extensively cited. The only reason I'm showing it to you is to emphasize how my research focus confronted me with the need to understand complexity and how multiple independently lethal processes could weave together to form a sort of web of death. Also, at the same time, I was seeing this, not just in the ER, but in the clinics and in the shopping malls and the lines at the drugstore, and I saw the beginnings of it in myself, too. I'd always been active as a young man, but my career impacted my lifestyle in many unhealthy ways. And I saw the seeds of this in myself and in many of my colleagues. And so in due course, and after a lot of reflection and reading and research, I developed a model of what I call the sick aging phenotype. I present this model here in its simplest form, another web of death, as it were. In this model of unhealthy aging, time itself, diet, physical inactivity, and the muscle atrophy of aging lead to the accumulation of visceral and somatic fat, insulin resistance, and the metabolic syndrome. So, like our brain ischemia model, it's hideously complex. We tend to think of the complexity of an organism in terms of its development or its evolution or its normal physiological functioning. But the decay or decline of a complex system can itself be complex. And if you think of complexity in terms of information, it can be even more complex than the normal functioning. And this sick aging phenotype is even more complex and dire than it looks. Some of these processes, more than shown here, are bidirectional, going in both ways, so they're self-amplifying. So without a very strong medicine, the early sick aging phenotype will progress to the late sick aging phenotype, with full-blown diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, stroke, morbid obesity, catastrophic weakness, extreme frailty, chronic pain, polypharmacy, depression, cognitive decline, what some people are now calling type 3 diabetes, and medical dependence. Who am I? I'm a diabetic. I'm a hypertensive. I'm a patient. I'm a sick old man. That becomes your identity. And it's true, you need the healthcare system now to sort of limp from one day to the next because of a complex of preventable degenerative diseases of aging. These themes, and the theme of biological complexity, even in decline, and the role of human identity in decline will come up again. Now, I don't want to belabor this. It's not going to be news to anybody here that lifestyle medicine, and in particular exercise medicine, is powerful medicine. Amen. And notwithstanding an almost endless amount of wrangling and arguing about it, particularly on the interwebs, but also in the literature, this is true of both endurance or aerobic exercise and resistance or strength exercise. Any form of vigorous exercise hits all of these targets in the sick aging phenotype. Again, I think the sick aging phenotype calls for a very strong and specific medicine, and as you will see, I advocate for a particular form of exercise medicine because I think it fits the bill for promoting a healthy aging phenotype. But at the end of the day, any exercise is better than no exercise as long as it doesn't get you hurt, and I want to be clear about that. Even so, doctors need to do better. Here we have the most powerful medicine in the world for unhealthy aging. And what do our doctors tell us? They say, get some exercise. That's ridiculous. Imagine you had pneumonia and your doctor gave you this prescription. You would be outraged. And yet, we don't blink when our doctors tell us to get some exercise. If exercise is a medicine, the most powerful medicine, it should be prescribed as a medicine with a specific formulation, route of administration, dose, frequency, titration parameters, and therapeutic targets. And the criteria for a good exercise medicine would be the same as for any other medicine. We want any medicine to be safe. We want it to have a wide therapeutic window, meaning a large range between the minimum toxic dose and the minimum effective dose. We want it to be comprehensive. We want it to be specific and effective, and we want it to be simple and efficient. Now, when it comes to specificity and effectiveness, we have to think about what we're treating, our therapeutic targets. And when we look at frailty and at the sarcopenia and osteopenia of aging and the central role that they play in the sick aging phenotype, we will be led very quickly, in my opinion, to the conclusion that strength training is critical for older populations. That's because, as demonstrated in this great paper by Nilwick et al. And many, many others, strength is the general fitness attribute that is preferentially lost in aging. We lose all the other fitness attributes too, but the type 2 fibers that contribute the most to strength undergo much more atrophy than type 1 fibers. Aerobic exercise and conditioning are critical in aging, but when it comes to hanging on to our precious muscle and bone tissue, strength is the first priority because it's strength training that builds muscle and bone tissue. So a growing body of research literature like this left me increasingly persuaded that strength training should supplant metabolic conditioning as the cornerstone of exercise medicine for healthy aging. You need both. But without strength training, you're going to lose muscle and bone. And that is a functional and physiological catastrophe. Now, barbells are an excellent route of administration for strength training medicine. Barbells are incredibly safe because they exploit normal human movement patterns on stable surfaces without unpredictable forces or joint moments. They're exquisitely dosable. They have the largest and most finely tuned therapeutic window of any medicine I've ever used. They hit all the energy systems and general fitness attributes, and they strike multiple therapeutic targets in the sick aging phenotype. They've been shown to be effective not only in improving strength, but also muscle and bone mass, cardiovascular health, daily function, and independence. And the prescription is simple and efficient. Just 4 main exercises, some individually prescribed ancillary exercises, conditioning, and active rest. 2 to 3 days a week of training. If you want to take exercise medicine in its most powerful, most exquisitely dosable, safest, most comprehensive, and most efficient form, barbells are a great way to go. And in my clinical experience, they're the best way to go. So, let's take a look at the prescription in action. This is one of my athletes, Anne Bizard. She's a retired nurse in her 80s, demonstrating the squat. This movement is extremely powerful, and it imposes a deep training stress. It allows an athlete to lift a lot of weight. Here, Anne is warming up with 100 pounds over a very long range of motion and recruiting a huge amount of muscle tissue in the process. And note that this is a normal human movement pattern, sitting down and standing up. So every muscle, tendon, ligament, nerve, bone is contributing holistically and naturally to this movement pattern, rather than being isolated in a machine or in some artificial movement that no human would actually execute in daily life. Here's another natural, functional movement pattern. Bend over and pick up something heavy. The deadlift trains this movement pattern ergonomically. It meets our exercise prescription criteria, and it allows the athlete to generate huge forces. This is Anne warming up again with 135 pounds, but she's pulled over 200 pounds in competition. And this exercise most explicitly trains the back. It requires the athlete to isometrically stabilize her spine so that it becomes a force transmitter rather than a force absorber. And that is a critical and life-changing capacity. And as if that were not enough, the deadlift, like all of the standing barbell movements, loads the axial skeleton and the hips, producing a huge osteogenic stimulus for the promotion of bone density and bone quality. The standing overhead press obviously builds shoulder and arm strength and flexibility, but you can also see here that it is a dynamic whole body exercise that transmits force from the ground and the hips to the shoulder chassis. It builds the upper back musculature, and again, it loads the axial skeleton and the hips. It challenges balance and shoulder mobility, and in this technique here, it introduces an explicit power component. It's an absolutely terrific exercise. It's my favorite. And of course, any gym bro will tell you that the bench press is the very cornerstone of weight training, if not life itself. You got to train the chesticles, right? Actually, no. This is actually the most dispensable of the exercises because it does not induce an axial load or train balance, and its range of motion is limited. But it does have value for building the muscles of the anterior chain. It does demand isometric contributions from the core and the legs, and it's an excellent confidence builder. I see it as a mandatory assistance exercise for the press. And it's accessible. Almost anybody can bench. What if you can't do one or more of these exercises? We have alternatives. Here we see bungee squats at body weight for the squat, rack pulls for the deadlift, T-bar rows for the press. We can either get somebody strong enough to do the standard movement pattern, or we can substitute an approximation of the movement pattern. In training the athlete of aging, the key is to focus on what she can do, not what she can't do. We assess the athlete for the movement patterns that she still retains, and then we are total experts at loading that movement pattern and making it stronger. You'll notice that I keep using the term athlete to refer to my clients. Not an accident. Much more on that later. Here's one of my clients, athletes, Jane, a retired nurse, doing a modified overhead rack press at 90. She's kind of awesome. Conditioning is critical, and for reasons I've laid out in depth elsewhere, including but not limited to the research of Tabata and Gibala and others, I'm a fan of high-intensity conditioning. Our favorite in-gym modality is the sled, which digs deep into the cytosolic or anaerobic energy system. This kind of training at the far end of the bioenergetic spectrum produces benefits all across the spectrum, not only in anaerobic capacity, but in mitochondrial or aerobic capacity, and without the same investment in time or stress as long, slow distance training. It keeps type 2 fibers in the game, and it improves cardiovascular health and endurance. Other conditioning modalities are available. We teach a highly modified form of karate for seniors at Greysteel. We call it Greykata. But of course, many of our athletes are swimmers or runners or bikers or whatever. Lift weights and play your sport is a pretty succinct and effective prescription for healthy aging. The devil is in the details. You have to do it safely and effectively, but lift weights and play your sport is the barbell prescription in a nutshell. And it works. Our athletes and their physicians are enormously happy with their transformations. Our clinical findings mirror a mountain of published research findings with which I'm sure many of you are familiar. We see improvement in all of the general athletic attributes. Our clients all improve their strength, power, and endurance, and for that data, you need look no further than their training logs. They also demonstrate improvements in body composition, mobility, balance, and endurance. In addition, ongoing medical evaluation of our athletes by their primary care providers reveals that they routinely demonstrate improvement in serum lipids, bone density, blood pressure, and insulin sensitivity. We routinely see improvement in bone mineral density, which is, of course, huge. So here we have a form of exercise medicine that is salutary, scalable, and safe. Consider the NNT, or the number needed to treat. For any potential therapy that your doctor recommends to you, always ask him for the NNT. What's the number needed to treat? That's the number you need to treat with an intervention to get one positive outcome. For the intervention of strength training and the outcome of increased strength and power, that number is 1. That's virtually unheard of in pharmacotherapy. Everybody gets stronger. Barbell training is the single most powerful medicine I've ever used, and I've pushed some big drugs in my time. So about 11 years ago, that would have been my entire presentation, because in those days, telling a room full of doctors that the little old hypertensive diabetic osteopenic ladies under their care should deadlift 150 pounds could get a little awkward. And I really had to argue all this stuff in detail. But that argument's pretty much over now. So these days, I'm thinking about different aspects of healthy aging and how training as athletes can help us live better lives. I'm thinking a lot about how training and the very concept of the athlete can transform not only our physical existence, but our entire existence, and be of critical value in helping us become who we truly are, in making us more valuable to our community, and even in helping us find some meaning and purpose in what many find apparently a meaningless universe. I disagree. But such grandiose musings will still drag us back to a mechanistic biological examination of how it all works. So, how does it all work exactly? First, I want us to get our terms right. In our system of training, and in the book, we make the following lexical distinctions for clarity. I follow Ripito in defining exercise as anything that gets you up off your butt and makes you move. Training is the special form of exercise that progressively improves the general fitness attributes required by all athletes, from bobsledders to ballerinas, from fencers to football players. Everybody needs to train the general athletic attributes. So everybody belongs in the gym, training the general athletic attributes of strength, power, endurance, mobility, balance, and body composition. Practice is the special form of exercise that promotes skill in a particular physical discipline. So practice is sport-specific. Training is general. So for example, in the Marine Corps, we had physical training, of course, but we also had things like rappel borders drills or platoon tactics. That was practice. There's no need for gymnasts or ballerinas to practice their platoon tactics. And I don't want to shock you, but it turns out that Marines don't spend a lot of time practicing their pirouettes or their pliés. But everybody has to do calisthenics or general strengthening. In track and field, putting the shot is practice. The weight room is training. In boxing, sparring is practice. Jumping rope is training. And we see this distinction outside the physical domain in all sorts of enterprises and professions. You get your training, and then you enter practice to refine your skills. But hopefully, neither your training nor your practice ever really end. So with our terms defined, I'd like to look at models of training and athletic development. Any model of training must address the universal phenomenology of training, recognized since antiquity. You train. You get whooped. You recover a little stronger. You can then train a little harder and continue improvement. If you don't train again, your performance decays. In the late 20s or so, the biologist Hans Selye formulated the general adaptation syndrome, not as a model of training, but of the organism's variable responses to stress. The organism, confronting a stress, first enters a stage called alarm, where it mounts biochemical and behavioral and endocrine and genetic responses to the stress. If the stress lies within the organism's adaptive range, it will successfully mount a resistance and it will undergo phenotypic changes to deal with future or ongoing stresses. If the stress lies outside the organism's adaptive range, or if the stress is applied too frequently, the organism will enter a stage of exhaustion and eventual collapse. It's been overtrained, so to speak. Now, this model clearly displays a sort of loose isomorphism or homology with the phenomenology of training that we just examined. And so it was ultimately appropriated by coaches and exercise physiologists, and it's still used as what I call a metaphysical model of training. Modified as the stress-recovery-adaptation model, among others, it has the athlete absorbing a training stress, which disrupts homeostasis. You get whooped. Then, with adequate rest, sleep, nutrition, and time, he bounces back to a new adapted baseline, which some call supercompensation. If in this new adapted state, the athlete absorbs a new, larger stress, he can re-enter the cycle and proceed to a new, stronger, fitter level of adaptation. This is the foundation of what we call progressive overload. It's extremely powerful, the physiological equivalent of the miracle of compound interest. It's the underlying model for my practice in a strength and conditioning clinic for older athletes. Now, this beautiful figure incorporates a lot of training wisdom, and we owe it to that irascible old gadfly, Ripito. It's really an amazing synthesis. Time is on the horizontal, and performance is on the vertical. Rate of adaptation is the dashed rate of adaptation is the increasing curve, and the rate of adaptation is the declining curve, and the figure critically incorporates a curve for training complexity. Of course, simple progressive overload in a linear fashion doesn't work forever, right? Strength rises quickly at first with a rapid rate of adaptation because the athlete is far from his or her genetically determined performance potential. But over time, the rate of adaptation slows as the athlete becomes stronger and more fit, and the training complexity increases markedly to promote ever smaller gains as the athlete sort of asymptotically approaches her performance potential. The athlete of aging confronts an even more challenging scenario because increasing age changes the performance potential over time. Part of my job is to recognize and accommodate that. The rate of adaptation slows earlier, training complexity rises earlier, and at some point, the athlete may find that she's running hard just to stand still. That's the grittiest, most dedicated, most determined athlete of all, and her training will be complex, even as she slowly loses ground. So I particularly do want to draw your attention to this part of the graph, the training complexity curve. We're going to have more to say about that later. Training complexity begins low and increases over the athlete's career, even when the rate of adaptation and performance potential drop off. In fact, it's because of those things that the complexity increases. And here, complexity is an information metric, as in many other disciplines, but you can also think of it as a surrogate for the individualization of programming to the individual athlete. The march of time, which is the march of entropy, which is the march of complexity, grows over time. Novice, intermediate, advanced, and elite programs all demonstrate mounting complexity. But in all of these programs, no matter how simple or complex, recovery, or what Selye called resistance, is the fulcrum. You can have exactly the right exercise selection, the right range of sets and reps, the right program, and all will be for naught if recovery variables, which are training variables, are not dialed in. We're talking about nutrition, sleep, active rest, stress reduction, avoiding crack and heroin, and so on. You don't get stronger from lifting weights. You get stronger by recovering from lifting weights. And so, as I'm fond of saying, while it is the case that exercise is part of a healthy lifestyle, because of the central role of recovery as an athlete under progressive overload, training is a healthy lifestyle. It's the lifestyle of the athlete. Training integrates everything. A novice improves performance rapidly in linear progression on the blue curve here again, but ultimately comes to the flat part of the curve where the rate of progression slows and complexity mounts, with intermediate programs progressing to advanced and elite programs. Over time, for my population, the goal is to keep the athlete of aging in this region, which I call the nominal advanced zone, or NAS. Performance will oscillate up and down the NAS because of natural biological variation, life events, illnesses, injuries, vacations, grandkids, and so on. But the cost of coming off the NAS are prohibitive. So our programming is designed to keep the athlete in this zone once she attains it. She becomes what I call the Sisyphean athlete, with apologies to Albert Camus. Camus tells us the ancient story of the Greek king Sisyphus, condemned by the gods and cursed to roll a stone up and down a hill over and over forever. The resonance with the absurdity of the human condition is obvious, and Camus' moral is that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. So here is our defiantly happy Sisyphean athlete of aging, rolling her stone up and down this hill in good times and bad. Amen. I invoked the myth of Sisyphus to begin my argument that training and the concept of the athlete has deeply human, existential, and universal dimensions. And I will again emphasize that training, real progressive training, always implies mounting complexity. Complexity in programming, but also increasingly complex performance capacities that form the foundation for training and practicing new capacities, and not just physical capacities. Let me make all this more concrete by modeling the long-term evolution of the athlete. From the foundation of physical existence, health, and basic physical capacity, we can begin training. Again, strength and condition develop the basic athletic attributes: strength, power, endurance, mobility, balance, and body composition. Upon this foundation, we can build an athletic practice and more elaborate training and conditioning pursuits. To the basic barbell exercises and the sled, we add, say, a martial arts and a yoga practice like we do at Greysteel. We add heavy bag work to prowler conditioning. And we add power resistance training in the form of, say, Olympic lifting. Clearly, athletic development and practice has gone from relatively simple to relatively complex. We've gone from basic physical existence to existence plus training to existence plus training plus practice. The whole definitely becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Something new is emerging. More is different, as Philip Anderson said in his seminal 1972 paper, At the Dawn of the Science of Complexity. From here, we can progress to even more advanced training, practice, and play. Strength and conditioning training remain the foundation, but now our athlete has progressed to, say, advanced kata and yoga practice, and she's added kettlebells to her conditioning, and perhaps she's engaged in competition in one or more of these areas. And upon this highly accomplished edifice, she may progress to teaching and mentoring and coaching and research. This is the ascent into mastery. In medicine, we have an old saying, see one, do one, teach one. And some of the more elitists in my profession hold to a very contentious view, as do I, that to ascend to mastery as a physician or as a coach or any other sort of professional is to be not just a clinician or a practitioner, but also a teacher and a contributor to the overall field in some way. Mastery always involves more than individual accomplishment. Mastery always involves some explicit commitment and contribution to a community. So the ascent to mastery can culminate in legacy as an accomplished athlete, coach, community builder, and thought leader, or an accomplished scientist, mentor, and thought leader, or whatever. That, I propose to you, is not just an outstanding athletic career, but an outstanding career of any type and part of a life well lived. So the athlete is not just a physical athlete. And again, the complexity curve, which can also represent performance or individualization, it's skewed to the right and drops off rapidly. For the athlete of aging, this represents the falling away of capacities at the end of a training career, that is, a lifespan, in a way that also demonstrates the phenomena of health span and its inverse, the compression of morbidity, and what I call the extension of complexity. Complexity extends and propagates complexity. The more trained and practiced the athlete, the greater the complexity of the arena in which the athlete can contend. The more trained and practiced the athlete, the greater the complexity of training required to expand his capacities. So training creates and ascends a ladder of complexity. Now, there's an alarming slide title. Everyone's woo alert is going off right now, but I assure you, I'm a methodological naturalist, which is to say I'm a scientist, and I'm a relatively hardcore physicalist at that. This doesn't mean I don't believe in mind or love or spirit or meaning. Quite the opposite, because I've devoted my life to helping people attain and maintain their potential. And you can't attain or maintain your potential without mind, love, spirit, or meaning. But I'm skeptical of the idea, very popular in the academy and certainly in the zeitgeist, that some natural processes are not reducible to physics. I'm not convinced of that. What I see is that the emergence of complexity and new orders of nature is innately physical and ultimately boils down to natural law and ultimately thermodynamics. Not all of the contents of the universe are essentially physical, but I think they're all anchored in the physical. And as such, I find the cosmos to be an excellent metaphor for the arena of life and the training of the athlete. Human mind, love, spirit, and meaning are not themselves physical, but they are anchored in the physical. The training process is generally isomorphic with phenomena some of the Institute members may be familiar with. Shape memory alloys can be trained through thermochemical cycling to remember particular shapes and assume them under particular conditions. Metallic glasses can be optimized through controlled mechanical cycling. Researchers apply a stress, then allow the material to recover and then repeat, essentially putting the material through progressive overload to maintain its properties. It's called mechanical training. Polymer networks can be trained through repeated loading-unloading cycles, developing improved toughness and fatigue resistance. The material literally adapts its internal structure in response to the stress history. Concrete gets stronger through controlled loading cycles early in its curing process, a kind of strength training for foundational materials, pun intended. And we see stress recovery adaptation phenomena outside of engineering as well. In cosmic inflation models, we see a broken symmetry resulting in an expansion and inflation that lays the groundwork for all the complexity we see in the universe today. In stellar dynamics, under the stress of core exhaustion, stars switch from fusing lighter elements to heavier elements. And without this stellar nucleosynthesis, there's no chemistry and there's no cosmic complexity. In biological evolution, changes in the fitness landscape promote new adaptations, creating more complex organisms and more complex ecosystems and biospheres over time, making the cosmos itself more complex. Most fundamentally, we see this in the thermodynamics of the Belgian school and what are called dissipative systems. Open systems, under the stress of a large matter energy flux far from equilibrium, spontaneously organize themselves into new structures and steady states to maximize their entropy production and export entropy to the environment. In all of these processes, we see how a perturbation or a broken symmetry or a stress drives a system into a critical regime of fluctuations and transition states and recovery subject to scale-specific and ultimately thermodynamic selection, resulting in return to either an equilibrium state or a dissipative structure in a steady state. Both are states where the entropy production differential is zero, and so they're cosmic attractors. Now, equilibrium is what we can call a dead state. My job in the emergency department for decades was to prevent my patients from getting to thermodynamic equilibrium. But steady states are a kind of homeostasis, like the new adaptive homeostasis attained by an athlete after a training bout. So there's that word again. Let's talk about this word, athlete. Are these athletes? None of them are involved in competition, but they're all involved in a pursuit of goals and excellence through training and practice, including this guy here at the end, yours truly, teaching my residents how to pump a stomach, circa 2003. I was hairier back then. The word athlete comes to us from the Greek athlon, which refers to a prize, and from the word atlos, which refers to a contest for a prize. It can also refer to the arena itself. And the use of the term athlete has gone well beyond the idea of a physical contestant or a warrior in the Western tradition. For example, we have the idea of the athleta Christi, the athlete in Christ, or the champion of Christ, for example, Saint Sebastian or Louis I of Hungary, and Paul makes mention of this in Corinthians. There's the idea of the athletes agonistes, or the athlete in struggle, in which the word agon encompasses any struggle or contest, personal, physical, sportive, military, you name it. Seneca the Stoic writes about spiritual athleticism, and Epictetus writes about the daily contest. In more contemporary usage, we find ideas like the corporate athlete, or the intellectual athlete, or the artistic agon. The artist is an athlete, you see, who has to wrestle with his muse and his art. And we see innumerable athletic metaphors and figures of speech, like hitting a home run, or crossing the finish line, or knockouts and blowouts, and eating your Wheaties, and so on. So the concept of the athlete is expansive and commodious and runs throughout our tradition and carries several underlying themes. Training as an athlete most critically entails a pursuit of excellence and mastery, which are part of the purpose and prize. And purpose and prize, which are the roots of the word athlete, as we have seen, are explicitly teleological concepts. Being an athlete in any arena is directed towards a goal or a prize. When there's an intentional goal or a prize, we call that teleological. But for most in the academy, this word has unwelcome theological implications. But in the sciences, since the 70s, and particularly in the life sciences, you increasingly hear talk about teleonomy. Teleonomy is the apparent goal-directed behavior of natural systems without any imputation of conscious agency, particularly biological systems. Ernst Mayr illustrated this in an important paper in the 70s when he distinguished between the proposition that the wood thrush goes south and thereby avoids the winter, a sort of just so story, as opposed to the wood thrush goes south in order to avoid the winter. The first formulation leaves something out. It leaves out the in order to, without which we can't fully understand the phenomenon. The wood thrush's instinctive behavior has been selected because it functions in order to promote survival. A telos, whether it's teleonomic or teleologic, whether it's directed or undirected, designed or undesigned, is an in order to. Now, I submit to you that the training of a human athlete is a telos, but it's an explicitly teleological process. It's an exercise of human agency, and it is a compound of in order tos. For example, the athlete of aging trains in defiance of declining physical potential in order to maximize performance of mental and physical attributes, in order to contest and defeat the sick aging phenotype, in order to expand the potentiality for being, in order to excel in the arena of life. This idea of a teleological progression is nothing new. It goes back to Aristotle. Maslow has, of course, proposed a hierarchy of needs that you've probably all seen, which seems to express a teleonomy, if not a teleology. I can offer a different perspective or phase or harmonic of the Maslowian hierarchy in the form of an athlon, which we can explore briefly. Again, upon the foundation of our physical existence and the good fortune of basic physical integrity and health and function, we can erect the edifice of training, and the increase in complexity here is manifest. Training creates facts on the ground, improvement in body composition and capacities, and above all, strength, and the first derivative of a strength, power, which is the quintessential athletic attribute. Training creates a foundation for more complex and more accomplished physical practice with continuous improvement, not only the basic athletic attributes and the health and physical integrity upon which they're supported, but also on the improvement in speed and agility and the emergence of new skills. This opens up opportunities for competition and coaching and for teaching research. And all of this is an invitation to mastery. And as I've already pointed out, because recovery constitutes the fulcrum of the training cycle, being an athlete is in fact not just exercise and practice, but a way of life that is highly integrated and integrating. Mastery, true mastery, integrates us with ourselves, with our way of life, with our community, and it gives us a perspective on our place in the world and in the universe, which is to say, meaning. It not only contributes to, but also demands self-actualization, self-expression, ongoing critical self-assessment and self-improvement, lifelong study, training, and practice, and an authentic apprehension of our own horizons, including the horizon of time. Repeated cycles of stress, recovery, and adaptation bring us to mastery not just of our physical discipline and of our profession, but if properly applied, bring us to mastery of ourselves. And ultimately to victory and completion, whatever that may mean to the individual athlete in her individual arena. And once again, I want to highlight the ascent of complexity. This is what athletes do. And again, this is what the universe does. Over the course of deep time, the universe seems to do three things. It dissipates free energy, which is maximal at the Big Bang. It expands entropy, which increases possibly to a maximum at heat death. And in between, it produces an efflorescence of enormous complexity. That's the life cycle of the universe, and it's also the life cycle of the athlete. At the end of the day, we'll always get to thermodynamics. All real physical processes are irreversible, and all real processes consume free energy and increase entropy. If we consider any spontaneous process involving a system plus its surroundings, it will roll downhill, never uphill. If the change in free energy is adequate, we can couple the reaction to a dissipative process, an engine, and do work. Perhaps we'll do pressure volume work, like using a piston to elevate a litter of kittens. A kit engine. Alternatively, such an engine may form spontaneously in the form of a dissipative structure, a Bernard cell, or a vortex, or a hydrothermal vent, or a living system. The underlying driver is this process of energy dissipation and production of entropy, enhanced by the interposition of the spontaneous development of such a dissipative structure. This is what the universe does. This is the contribution of Prigogine in the Belgian School of Physical Chemistry. The universe evolves dissipative structures in order to potentiate the consumption of free energy and maximize entropy expansion. These dissipative structures are just that, structures, and they litter the universe, creating a complex landscape that invites and constrains the evolution of new dissipative structures that can piggyback on them in an ever-increasing expansion into what the philosopher and biologist Stuart Kauffman calls the adjacent possible. And it's through this process of mounting complexity and capacity, this process of stress, recovery, and adaptation at every scale of existence, that nature brings forth new orders and new ways for matter and energy to be. This is the innate creativity of physics, explicitly including thermodynamics and Prigogine's physics of becoming, all subject to natural selection across scales and orders. And natural selection always comes down to thermodynamics, because the evolution of nature from any state to any new state that does not run according to thermodynamic writ will not survive if it comes into being at all. And so we see this ladder of complexity, which is really a ladder of new capacities built on old capacities, and we've seen that before. We've seen it in the progress of the athlete, this ladder of complexity. And again, I'll draw your attention to the trajectory of the complexity curve, which can also represent performance and individualization. It's skewed to the right, drops off rapidly. For the universe, This means that the decline of complexity from the stelliferous era to the degenerate era to the black hole era to the dark era will itself be complex, because the mechanisms of decay will be constrained by the complexity of the structures that have been built up over time. For the athlete of aging, this represents the falling away of capacities at the end of a training career, that is, a lifespan, in a way that also demonstrates the phenomenon of compression of morbidity. The changing complexity and capacity of the athlete over time need not display a symmetrical signature. Complexity itself can extend complexity over time. I mean, when you look at the biology of aging and death, you see that how we grow old and die is complex too. I can certainly attest to that. Or read your Gibbon, how an empire dies is complex. How a universe dies is complex. A complex, interesting, worthy existence is complexity in the realm of being human. For the human subject, for the athlete aging, complexity is a rich and meaningful life. And personal complexity can promote and extend personal complexity. And I claim that this is what we are doing when we coach and train and study and learn and grow and become what we can be. This is the very negation of a different complex phenotype we saw at the beginning, the sick aging phenotype. This is the athletic aging phenotype. And this is the negation of the identity we saw there, the sick old man. Yes, we're old, but we're old and strong, still training and practicing, extending our performance and our health span. We don't identify with our medical conditions or as patients. We identify as athletes in all the realms of our existence, always getting better at getting better, until the free energy is drained away and entropy and time overtake us. Now, I understand that the term transhuman might be a little bit of a faux pas here, I don't know, but I'm just using it here as a shorthand for technologically empowered and extended humans. The stated mission of this institute is to pioneer technologies aimed at leveraging and extending human capabilities. I should hope that by now it would be clear that I can get behind that. Training with barbells to extend human function well into the second half of life is such a technology. And I maintain that decades or centuries from now, when our species has embraced physical integration with all manner of technologies, that the concept of the athlete will still serve us well. Clearly, I'm an optimist. Let's consider an example I've selected to be not too science fiction-y or speculative, but rather prosaic. Consider a fighter pilot. Drop Tom Cruise into the cockpit of a modern interceptor. Right? So situated, he is no longer a prolific, popular, vertically challenged actor. Maverick becomes a nervous system integrated into tens of millions of dollars and many thousands of pounds of awesome technology. His body is extended into an artifice of steel, rubber, glass, and silicon, with a nervous system of its own, with eyes and ears that augment Maverick's eyes and ears. Amen. Machine and man become a unity. Maverick's body is a fighter jet. How is this integration possible? Through technology itself, of course, but also through training and practice and the ascent into mastery. By the time he makes commander and gets passed over for captain and makes his second movie, right, Maverick has become a leader and a teacher and a philosopher of aerial warfare. There are such people. Encased within and integrated into a machine that would have seemed godlike to people a century ago, he remains completely and indelibly human, and he is an athlete. Give us completely synthetic bodies, replace every organic component with silicon and titanium and smart nanomaterials, switch out every neuron for a microcircuit. We will immediately look for ways to use those godlike bodies more productively expressively, gracefully, beautifully, athletically. We will probe the limits of our new capacities and attempt to surpass them, and not just through upgrades, but through training, practice, play, and mastery. It's what we do. Get as sci-fi as you like about this. Give me a future, a distant future, in which our descendants encode their consciousness into the very quantum fields that constitute the foundation of our ontology, and I will give you athletes who will still strive and train and practice to attain mastery. Because that's what athletes do. And as I have shown you, that is what the universe does. As promised, I will close by telling you why what they do here at the Institute is important, why it is of cosmic significance. Every one of you is a candle burning in your own corner of a dark universe, illuminated by virtue of your existence and the brightness of your burning through time. Every one of you reveals the cosmos from a perspective that is unique to you, in a way that completes all of the possible ways the universe can be. When we expand the complexity and capacities of the athlete, we expand the complexity and capacities of the cosmos. And I think we can find some meaning in that, and some purpose in that. And meaning is a prize, and purpose is a prize, and prize is athlon. And all of us who seek meaning and purpose are, therefore, athletes. And so, we must train. Amen. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
Do we have time for questions?
Just a few.
How bad was it? How far did I go over, Ken?
You're fine.
Okay, good. This gentleman.
Thank you for coming. I wish the whole world could have heard what you had to say.
Me too.
I sort of perceive that you are a 21st century Antoine Béchamp. Antoine Béchamp was a brilliant French physiologist, chemist. He reminded Louis Pasteur that the germ theory was flawed. He said it's not just a germ, it's how your body responds to the germ, whether or not you get sick. And so you're talking about resilience. And
yes,
resilience determines the way we respond. So go expand on resilience, the power of resilience.
Of course. So the person who actually got me into this, Mark Ripito, the author of Starting Strength, has a very famous saying out there. He says that strong people are harder to break and more useful in general, which I believe. And there actually is a component of resilience that comes from training, and allow me to tell you a story to illustrate. My oldest athlete will be 99 in November. Yeah. His name is John Clausen, and you probably saw a little bit of him in the video over there. You have to excuse me, I had lymphoma a couple of years ago, and I don't have salivary glands on the left side of my face anymore, so I have to, sorry. John Clausen got sick about a year ago, and he came down with abdominal pain, and within a few hours he was in the emergency department, and he was in pretty bad shape. He had a distended abdomen. He ended up having gallstone pancreatitis, and he probably had some spill as well, and he started to become shocky, and he had a rigid abdomen, and it was not good. And in the emergency department, they kind of took one look at him and said, yeah, he's going to die. Yeah, he's 98 years old. His mortality is 90%, right? So they kind of kissed him on the forehead and tucked him in and gave him some fluid. He kind of went through the motions. Fortunately, the president of the hospital was my intern once upon a time. And so I called him up and I said, this is not your average 99-year-old. And they saved him. And he had to go through some procedures that might have killed another 99-year-old, might have shattered somebody else, even somebody in their 70s or 80s. And his surgeon attributed it to his physiologic reserve. And physiologic reserve is, in fact, what we're talking about, resilience. Because it's not just the stress, it's your response to the stress. Yeah, yeah. This gentleman here.
While I love the dumbbells, and Wolff's Law will certainly, help the bones compensate for the dumbbells, the joint space, I guess, is the complexity that you're talking about with aging patients. How do you, as a physician, think that it's best to advise an athlete dealing with deteriorating joint space with either osteoarthritis or whatever inflammation they have?
We find that, thank you very much for the question. So did everyone hear the question? So what we find is, and this is supported by some literature, most of the exercise physiology literature is not great, which is why I think that what they're doing here at the Institute, it's a cut above. But there is literature that suggests that loading the joint is actually salutary. Joint fluid is a non-Newtonian fluid, and it undergoes physical changes under loading. It changes its viscosity when you load it. There's also some preliminary evidence that loading the joints helps drive joint fluid actually into the cartilage to help suffuse the cartilage and improve nourishment of the cartilage. But there's no doubt about it. There's never been any correlation of heavy loading strength training with arthritis. In fact, the data suggests quite the opposite. But over time, people develop arthritis, and I've got it. And so it doesn't stop me from training. Training actually makes my arthritis better. It makes me more functional. One day, somebody will tell me that one of my joints is, it's no good anymore. It wore out. And when I find that out, I won't do what most doctors are still recommending to their patients. Let's see how long we can drag this out before we write. And what I tell my athletes, and increasingly what their doctors are willing to go along with, is I tell them, in fact, I just had a Marine Corps colonel as one of my clients, just got diagnosed with bone-on-bone hip. And I said, bone-on-bone knee. And I said, joint replacement, next week. Do it now. Why wait for all the muscles around the joint to get weak? Go get your artificial joint and then come back and resume training. I've done that with dozens of clients. The outcomes are very, very good. But there's no data that loading the joints in this way actually promotes the development of degenerative arthritis. This gentleman here.
I've recently just started working out with weights, but I'm curious. I had my bladder and prostate removed, and so I don't have a testosterone maker in my body. So I'm wondering, am I doing myself any good with the weights without testosterone?
Okay, two things about that. Thing number one is that your bladder and your prostate don't make testosterone. So if we're all adults here, not to be too indelicate about it. If you still have testes, you may still have some basal level of testosterone production. Unfortunately, aging sucks, and you just don't make as much testosterone as you used to over time. And for people with clinical indications, I would support testosterone replacement therapy. It can be salutary in older men. Thing number two is, no, you're not wasting your time. So, again, not to be too indelicate or put too fine a point on it, but if in fact your testosterone level is very good, then you are, from an endocrinological perspective, an old woman. And I train old women. They're not wasting their time. Somebody in the back here.
Thank you. Everybody loves humor, even when it's on the most indelicate subjects. A twofer. First one's a quick one. Have you ever hung out or had a chat with our fantastic, maintained ex-football player Tom Brady?
I have not.
Second question, more common, is you were mentioning joint replacement. Because the shoulder group involves 4 muscle groups, what has been your success and concerns of athletes that are elderly getting shoulder replacement, and they are traditionally, you don't have to look far, in even good sources like Cleveland or Mayo online, they tell you don't ever do a push-up again, don't ever lift over 25 pounds. What is your view on that?
Yeah, unfortunately. So thanks for asking the toughest damn question. So I have a very clear memory of being on an orthopedic surgery rotation as a resident and talking about shoulder implants, and the chief resident said, a guy like you would wear out a shoulder in a year. It just sucks. So artificial shoulders, that's a different story. Knees and hips, go get it. Go get it done, right? If you've got bone on bone or you got arthritis that's limiting, get that joint replaced. Shoulder, I'm not so much in a hurry because you're right, you can't load it. You can't load the artificial shoulder. And so then your training really becomes complex and highly individualized. We have to work around that. So, sorry. Yeah.
Time for two more questions, and that's
right,
it.
but so should somebody just suffer through with what they've got if they're able to function?
No,
somewhat?
They should come work with me. I'll find a way to make them strong. I can train. I'm serious. I can train, like I train people with terminal cancer. I train people with multiple sclerosis. I train people with Parkinson's disease, right? You find the movement patterns that are retained and make them stronger. It's not complicated. Everybody gets stronger.
Yeah, some theories of medicine are mechanistic, I think you could say, and then some are cosmic, and in the broad sense of providing like meaning to life. Our talk is about adapting to aging. How about our adapting to dying as an athlete?
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing.
I was saying that there are schools of medicine that are more mechanistic, views of medicine that are more mechanistic, and then some that offer a spiritual solution, medical solution to spiritual problems. I wondered, how would your talk be if you were to talk about athletes dying? I mean, we're talking about their aging. Where does an athlete go after that?
What if an athlete...
I mean, yeah, where this comes from is I've always been fascinated by people and trees and nature being the best they can be. We had a talk in here 10 years ago or so about a man mayor of one of the big cities in America, and he was just the fullest. He got voted in again and again. He just the fullest human being he could be in that role. It's one of the reasons I like to come here. I think people like yourself, I see people being the people they are, the best people they can be. And I like seeing a tree do its treeness, become just as best that tree was meant to be. How do we handle dying? How do we handle when we can't?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. I'm not sure I understand the question. But again, my athlete, John Clausen, who's 98, we have written instructions from him that if, as I suspect he wishes, he collapses in the gym, he basically wants us to kiss him on the forehead and say goodnight. Jane, Jane, the 90-year-old who was doing presses, we just lost her. When she came to us, she couldn't look up. This was her, and you saw her doing presses at the end there after about 6 or 8 months. So what I like to tell people is Jane went to her death holding her head high. We gave her that. We made her as good as she could be, and we gave her a community, and we gave her accomplishment at the end of her life.
And that note, let's thank our speaker.